Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to HEMA exercises. And today we're stepping away from longsword and backsword and the rapier to instead talk about one of the other weapons that I do, this messer. And this really applies to any of the single-handed swords that you could possibly use, in particular of the German tradition because of the subject of the thumb grip, though it should be noted that is not a specifically German thing. This will still help you if you do, for example, Marozzo's two-handed sword, if you do longsword and just don't care about being stylistic, or alternatively, if there are other situations wherein a thumb grip is applied. Not a ton of them are coming to mind, but either way, this is really about that, and it is exemplified a lot by the messer because it uses it quite a bit. So first off, what is thumb grip? Thumb grip is when I have my standard grip wherein the sword is held, my knuckles going forward. Thumb grip is that. Turns my sword sideways in relation to me. What does it get me? Basically, if you watch the video about the 3 points of my arm that I can cut from, I've still got all my regular shoulder cuts, I've still got my regular elbow cuts and what they do, and I've still got my turning of my wrist or my lever cut from here. Thumb grip is just in that zone of wrist and allows me to act in a more tight extension of that wrist. So it gives me a little more control. It also gives me slightly more crooked angles. It gives it a bit more staying power compared to a regular wrist cut, just because I have a more supportive shape. Thumb grip is also very useful in regards to creating a shield, particularly in messer, as I'll kind of get back to that. Now, thumb grip, it should also be noted, is something that is definitely overused. Modern day I'm talking about. Partially this is because it does have very unique benefits, and if you don't know how to deal with it, it can be very hard to deal with. With a little bit of practice though, it's not necessarily that really different or special. The other thing about it is that once you get into thumb grip, it's very hard to train yourself to get out of it, and so it gets stuck in that kind of loop, not dissimilar to being stuck in a cutting pattern. And then the third is that a lot of people struggle with the transition from standard to thumb, and because of that, they start in a thumb grip and then stay in a thumb grip. I've even heard of some people who say that messer is done almost all from the thumb grip, which I vehemently disagree with, and not just for sake of interpretation, but also in sake for longevity of your arm. It's very important to remember that, especially when it comes to messer or things along those lines, you need to be letting the weight of the sword do the work, or else trying to force this to move faster than it's going to is just going to put a ton of strain here, and you may very well not be able to use messers anymore after a while. I was almost there. So, that direness aside, the focus for today is going to be how do I get smoothly into the thumb grip so I don't have the temptation to start there and thus get stuck there all the time. So firstly, one, make sure you're doing the thumb grip at the appropriate time. So this limits our options. That means we're only doing one of about 3 things, right? Option A is we're doing the Entrustal, which for those of you that don't study messer, this is basically a zwerk, right? Option 2 is we're doing the Wecker, this is essentially a Krumpf. Option 3 is we're doing the Zwinger, which is essentially a Schielhau, or alternatively, there is also, Zorn Ort does a similar thing to this. Any of your Winden does similar things to this, but that's not necessarily quite as difficult. It's really the cuts, the unspoken Meisterhau that have the difficulty in this. So, here's how you do it. Firstly, let's talk about the 3 zones that my sword will enter into when I'm doing any sort of specialized strike. And this also all applies to a standard Oberhau, and I will use that to show it. So, the 3 zones are wherever you start from, right? That could be at the shoulder, that could be low, that could be high, whatever. It is your starting guard wherein your sword is more attached to you than it is to anything else, right? The sword is here, the sword is here, the sword is here. It is mine, I am holding on to it. Place number 2 is as it is moving out into extension, here, right? And this is usually about when you're going to want your foot to start to step, as we get the sword moving first, then I put my body behind it. That moment, to me, the analogy I use a lot is it feels like the sword is freestanding, essentially. It's like, it's here, it's in my hand, but I am not holding it. The weight of itself is kind of sitting down into my hand, which makes it almost a bit like grabbing hold of a pole on a bus or a subway. Now, the third point is when it reaches its full extension, and that's when the weight of the sword now dominates my hand. So before it's attached to me, we're kind of 50-50, the sword is its own thing, and I'm just behind it. That point of it being its own thing is the best time to do the thumb transition, and this will be kind of apparent in some of the motions that we do. But again, just to illustrate that kind of super slow, attached to me, becoming its own thing. This is again when I want to start stepping. It is its own thing, and that's when my step would complete. I would hit, I'd line myself up. Okay, so let's talk about the thumb grip itself. I'm going to get relatively close to the camera. Hopefully I am still visible. Essentially for thumb grip, your target isn't to put the thumb on the blade. Your target is to put your thumb here on the back quillion. What that does is it causes the sword, even if I only slightly move it, to start turning inward. Versus if I just push it up onto the blade, nothing moves, right? So again, I'm coming to that back quillion, which makes the sword want to turn. Now at the same time, I'm relaxing my fingers as much as possible. We'll get back to this again in a second, which allows it to turn in my hand. Now, right about here, when it's done with a little bit of speed, my fingers close back in, my sword ends up on the short edge, or in this case it ends up in the spine, right? And my hand can close back on top of it. I'm not death gripping this. Now that it's held sideways, it's actually a slightly more secure grip because I've got more feeling, essentially, because it's all the pads of my fingers are in contact. So again, here's that. I just push my thumb up toward that back quillion, almost like I'm flicking on a flashlight, and it turns over. I'll hold that up to the camera as best I can. Just like that. Now, if you're in a slightly more modified grip like this, maybe you're holding onto the spine, it's the same idea. That one even can be a little bit easier because since your hand is more extended, it sort of falls into your hand, which can be quite nice. Okay, so with that motion in mind, now let's talk about transitioning into the proper strike. For this, we'll use our most extended one. We'll use the Zvinga. So for this, our point is we want to go from here. We're cutting it like a normal Oberhau or Zornhau, but we want to terminate hitting with the short edge on that same line. So I'm cutting down this 30-degree line. I would like to hit 30 degrees, but with my short edge. So what I do, I have it, we'll start at the shoulder for sake of ease, right? And we'll make things, actually no, we'll start up. So especially with Messer, you'll notice a lot of these specialized strikes begin in a low guard. Part of this is because of, well, there's a couple different reasons, but essentially for our training right now, this is going to help you a lot because the weight of the sword is going to help you. Versus here, once you have your transitions tight, you can do it out of the shoulder, no problem. But in general, starting more here will actually help quite a bit. I'm going to let the sword come up. So all I'm doing is I'm just doing a rising short edge cut from my right to my left. Now I'm not looking to actually add any power to this. I'm just looking to lift and then I let my sword come back. Lift, my sword is coming back. Lift, my sword is coming back. Okay, cool. That's that moment where it's become its own thing, much like I did right here. So when that happens, when I feel that lightness, that's when I stick the thumb up, and I'm here. Now my sword is held sideways. Here's that again, up, and my sword is sideways. Now, this has a couple benefits. Number one is that I'm not doing any work right now, right? I'm just lifting my arm, sticking my thumb up. Cool, sword's where I need it to be. Number two is that it is putting the shield in front of my head. That may not seem like a lot, but considering this is all about that middle line, and the only times I would use these strikes, specialized strikes, is when I'm dealing with someone who's trying to fight me in the middle line and I need that geometry. This works very well in my favor. Now, the final part of this is the more complicated bit, and this is where we got to start talking about the parts of our hand. So, with two hands in the blade, this is actually easier, right? Because your left hand or offhand can do all of what I'm about to describe by itself. So really, your right hand, job is already done. The only thing it needs to do after this point is extend naturally like it would for a normal cut. The left hand would take over. For doing this single-handed, what I want you to do is kind of divide your hand in two, like Mr. Spock. These two fingers, your pinky and ring, those are becoming your left hand. So what you need to do is once you get it to this point, I'm going to squeeze in and contract. You notice how that causes the other side of my hand to start extending, almost like I'm going, right? Now, when I do that, what that'll cause, as I do this, now because I contracted that and pulled it toward me, the tip, which has all of its momentum still, will be inclined to go forward. This isn't me forcing it with my index and thumb. That won't achieve anything. And furthermore, that's going to put strain on the arm. Instead, it's just me contracting my muscles. I go up, contract. And now it turns over very nicely. Up, turn, contract. You'll also notice there's a slight tempo difference here. It's relax, snap. This is the kind of snap that you can ask, right? The sword is going to move as fast as gravity deemed it's going to move, and as fast as that initial momentum told it to. if I try to make this go any faster, right, by controlling it, I can make it do the same speed, but I'm causing a lot more strain on my arm, right? Now, not to the point it's painful yet, but you do it a couple hundred times and then it's going to start to hurt. So, nice and relaxed, that's when it starts to really be useful, and I'm not using these muscles, I'm using just my little tendons right here. Now, in combination with that, we now start putting the right arm's job back into it. So that was the bottom part of my hand, or if I was using two hands in the sword, that would be my left hand. I'm now going to go ahead and extend my arm like I would for normal cut. So all that transition stuff happens here. Then the remainder of the cut is me applying the top of my hand and my arm's extension so that my tip goes where I want it to go. So here is that. I lift, turn, engage, extend. It's not a lot of extension, especially with the Zvinga, because mostly that engagement, that little contraction, is going to get my tip in line, right? So I'll show that now from the front. I lift, turn, engage. My tip ends up lined up with my left shoulder, making me nice and safe, popping things across the line. Nice and tight. Here's that from the other side. Now I just combine my step with it, and I'm all lined up and I'm swinging, right? Now, that's a simple example. Let's go over a slightly more complex example. Let's go over the Entrustau. So, the Entrustau is the same idea, right? It's that I am looking to get it into that moment of weightlessness, then I'm engaging the thumb, but now rather than just contracting to me, which causes the tip to come down in the line it was originally in, I'm instead going to contract it to me, and I'm going to put that thumb to work. Now, when I say by putting the thumb to work here is essentially, as I'm contracting my hand, if I just do that, it'll turn over as it did before. When I feel that contraction, I push my thumb slightly forward as I extend my arm. A lot like, the motion to me feels a lot like as if I was doing this, right? As if I'm trying to thrust with my nails upward, corta, if you do rapier or things along those lines. Except since my thumb is on the bottom, it leads to, now my hand goes up as it inverts, causing my strike to go horizontal. And this is less about me trying to tug that pommel around, and much more about I ask the tip to go forward from my right toward my middle, and then I would just simply step behind it. So again, here's just the hand motion. I lift, getting that sword up into the middle point. I turn my thumb, getting it to start to turn. Then I start contracting my hand. Now I just start putting that thumb into it. And you notice how I naturally want to step when this happens, because if I don't, I can still do it, but my hip is wanting to engage because this is a relatively short strike. So I go ahead and let that extend, and I end up stepping nice behind it. Here's that from this side. Here's that from the other side. And I'm nice and safe. Now, this does the same thing that I was talking about with the Zvinga, wherein my shield is in front of my face and protecting me. This leads to some people being very nervous about throwing this because they're worried about people trying to crack their hands, and that is absolutely understandable. The important thing to remember is that whenever I'm launching this sort of cut, this first preparation is what I want them to be worried about. As far as they're concerned, I'm about to do that, which is a heck of a lot harder for me to crack my hand on, and furthermore, you're going to deal with the consequences if you crack my hand in that moment. So I get someone to react to this, and then I line myself up behind it. Even if I'm doing it as a counteraction, it's still that moment is coming toward me. I want everything lined up and protecting me against where their sword is coming down. Essentially, trust in your shield a little bit more. If people are just going to play the hand tag game, you don't need to be doing Meisterhau against them. Anyway, though, so that's how I do the Entrustau on that side, and just for sake of, because Zvinga and Entrustau and Veka all can also go the other way. Right? And we'll use the Entrustau to talk about this, then we'll go to the Veka. The essential idea is, once I get this up and I strike with my thumb grip, if I want to strike again, all I need to do is, again, I squeeze with that pinky and that ring finger, and I let that turn my hand and my hip, so I am now able to strike on the other side. With the Zvinga, it'd be that same idea. I am up here, but now the plane becomes me cutting from below. That again requires just like that engagement of my pinky and ring finger and just the stability of my thumb being on the blade. I will say that when I do that one in particular, I'll see if I can do this so the camera can see. My hand is like this for the swinger. Right now it's on the short edge. When I engage, my thumb wants to move to the long edge. Actually, I could do it from this side. My hand wants to move from here to here because the weight of the sword shifts, and so I end up a little bit more like this to support it. That's just something I noticed as I was doing it just then. Now, in regards to the Vecca, same exact idea, except this one I can go a little bit more immediately. I go into Schranklet, and now my transition is more about me just, again, I'm pushing that short edge, so the sword turns in my hand, so dead on, that's all I'm doing. I turn it open, I contract with my pinky and ring finger as I step out. That gives the tip all that velocity so I can move, and then I just pull that pommel underneath my arm so that I go to the other peak and the tip can turn over. So I crush, hit. Here's that again, open, crush, hit. Nice and strong. So, all this is to say, the thumb transition is always happening from a place of relative rest. It's not me trying to force this. Like I said, you'll see folks, they'll stand with their thumb on the blade, and absolutely this can lead to certain things, but that's a lot of contraction, that's a lot of force on my arm. I don't like that, and furthermore, I'm not defended for most of that. That's me being here when the sword comes down, as opposed to me being here when the sword comes down, which is a heck of a lot safer. Two is, like I said, if you're standing like this, you're really limiting your options, and it's going to cause you to try and, because you're not so defended, you're going to try and move faster. Moving faster makes more strain. It's just a self-perpetuating cycle of meh. Now, another application of the thumb grip that I haven't talked about is the idea of turning it from extension. This is the exact same transition, just from a different place of rest. Really, this is more about you being able to relax your hand and just let it open to whatever side. The other thing that you could do with this is contract into a thumb grip. So for that, essentially the situation in which you may need to do this, I have attacked or parried or whatever on this side, and someone is cutting up into this line against me. I not only step around to parry, but I also go ahead and go into the thumb grip. So they're going to go up that flat and I'm protected, and then I can press them away from me or do other things with the Gewebbnacht. So for this, it's more about, how would I describe it? I'm still pushing my thumb up, but it's more my pinky, ring, and middle finger, as well as my index finger, are pulling that sword tight to me, close. And I do that in combination with a step. So I'm here comes that cut, up, and it just ends up supporting as my arm comes back and I get this nice strong parry shield against what they're trying to do. That's the one where really the thumb grip goes a long way in protecting you. Now, just to kind of show that motion with two hands, just because I did bring enough mention to it, we ought to show it. I'll use the synthetic for this. Everything I just talked about is still true, just now the offhand can do a little bit of work. So because I have two hands in the blade, I don't need to start down here anymore. I could, that's certainly where Schranklet comes from. But now it's the idea of I am striking out, the sword is its own thing in space, here, so I put that thumb into it, here. So I then now, rather than being my lead arm, once I'm out here in space, my left arm takes over, and that's what gives it that snap. Here's that again, push up, boom. Nice and strong, here's dead on, push up, boom. And I just support that with a decent amount of offline movement, and I'm safe and secure. So, all that is to say, that is how you transition into the thumb grip, or at least how I do it. It's nice and light, doesn't hurt my hand anymore. I used to try and force it. I used to stay in the thumb grip a lot with Messer, and that just led to my hand hurting all the time, and I almost couldn't do Messer anymore. So this does work, and if you have the patience to let it do its thing and train this response, it can go a very far way. Another important thing to consider is if you want to use a specialty strike, but this preparation is too long for you, maybe you shouldn't be using that at the distance you're using it at or the time you're using it at, because most all the descriptors for using these strikes do come out of these lower positions, not here. With time and practice though, of course, you can start launching things from the shoulder. It's just that's when you're really proficient at it. Either way though, hopefully this was helpful. Thank you very, very much for watching. We'll go over some other techniques another time.